What's going on, y'all? This is Chris with NoLimitSquad, your personal Isochain and fitness vlogging channel. Today, we're gonna cover the 3 phases of working out as far as movement is concerned. It's isometric, it's concentric, and it's eccentric. We're gonna dive into a little bit of these, explain what they are, why you'd want to utilize each of these phases of movement. Isometric, as pretty much everybody would know that's been watching the channel so far, isometric is when you hold a contraction. So for example, so this is pretty light right now, obviously, but it weighs something. Performing what's called a yielding isometric exercise is a yield, right? So imagine if this was a dumbbell, it wouldn't matter. What I'm doing is I'm holding this weight out here. After a time, it's gonna start to burn my arms. It's gonna burn. Just like if you've ever helped someone move and staying in the same position, it starts to burn. That is an isometric contraction. It's called yielding isometrics. You are holding something, preventing it from falling. The other type of isometric exercise is called overcoming isometric. So that's where and push against something that doesn't move, like that, like this wall. Obviously the wall's not gonna move, but the point is to put all of your energy, all your strength into trying to move something that cannot. That's how a lot of people in the past, in the olden days, before all the gyms and the weights and stuff like that came about, that's how those types of people got strong. Unfortunately, there was no loading reflex to it, so they didn't really understand exactly how much. They just knew that you could get strong. So those are the 2 types of isometric exercises. Then you have concentric, the initial phase of a movement. So if there's the bicep curl, this is the concentric phase, and this is the eccentric phase. All 3 of those phases, 2 of them fall into a category called dynamic movement. So dynamic contractions are, in every sense of the word, dynamic. Something's moving, something's happening. Static contraction, which only applies to isometric, is when something is not moving. So static contractions only apply to isometric. Dynamic only applies to concentric and eccentric. In future videos and in past videos, if you ever heard me say static or dynamic, now you know what I'm referring to. So when we talk about muscle fiber recruitment and how much strength you can gain from each, I explained in the isometric hypertrophy video, which you can find right here. Isometric exercise recruits nearly 100% of a muscle's motor units, coming in at 95%. Concentric, pushing or pulling, the initial phase of the movement, comes in at 89%. And eccentric, the return phase to the beginning part of the movement, comes in at 88. So 88 for eccentric, 89 for concentric, and 95 for isometric. So see, that's how important isometrics are. They're not just for physical therapy and recovering from injuries. It's important to get strong. If you've ever seen people working out in the gym and holding a contraction at the top of that movement, that is doing a lot more good for them than they probably even realize. Their friends probably just told them to do that, but it's very important to do that. To strengthen up your tendons and ligaments, your connective tissues, in addition to fully overloading the muscles. Remember, muscle hypertrophy, it comes from full muscular fatigue, not really load, full muscular fatigue. When we're performing dynamic movements, concentric and eccentric phases of the lift, we're damaging sarcomeres. Sarcomeres allow muscles to contract. And when those sarcomeres get damaged during dynamic lifts at the gym, that's where that DOMS comes from, delayed onset muscle soreness. The soreness feeling that we're so used to from working out in the gym, that's where that comes from. We damage our sarcomeres, they have to recover. We utilize all that energy. So that's the scientific part of it. That's what happens there. With isometric exercise though, we actually do not get that. We don't get any of that damage with the sarcomeres at all. It's crazy. So there's very, very little, if any, DOMS. And in fact, as of this recording, it's been a little bit over 4 months of using the Isochain, and not one time have I ever had DOMS with it. So progressive overload with concentric and eccentric phases of movement dynamically, whether in the gym or wherever, you know, you got a home place or whatever, it doesn't matter. What we would do is, once the 25-pound dumbbell is easy enough, we would go up to 30, or maybe instead of 3 sets of 10, we go to 3 sets of 12. That's progressive overload. You increase something, whether you reduce the rest time, you increase the weight, you increase the reps, you included another set, something that made you progress. If you don't utilize progressive overload in your workouts, you'll always be stuck at the same spot. Maybe you guys have seen these types of people at the gym where they're still messing around with the same weights they were 10 years ago. That's because they didn't utilize progressive overload. Maybe they just wanted to maintain. My guess, probably not. They just didn't know how to utilize that principle. It is the fitness principle that we all need to utilize to get better. However, with isometric exercises, it's really hard to do that because of the lack of loading reflex. And in my video on the 4 loading reflexes of isometric exercise, which you can find right here, I cover that only one loading reflex gives us progressive overload, which is live resistance. There's something live, something fighting against gravity, or in the case of the Isochain, we can utilize overcoming, yielding to, but overcoming isometric training via watching the display and seeing what the readout was in order to deduce how much more power we need to generate in order to beat what we did last time. The essence of progressive overload in general. Does that make sense? Isometrics just lead to better strength gains. As I said, 95 for iso, 89 for concentric, 88 for eccentric. I know that in the past, I've had it told to me by many a gym bro that if you really want to blow up, you got to slow down the movement on the return. Well, they were half right. If you want to get big, you have to utilize time under tension principles. Remember, in order to stimulate muscle hypertrophy, it's all about muscle fatigue. It's not really about the load. With isometrics, we can just hold the contraction for 20 to 45 seconds to stimulate that response. For example, performing a isometric hold here or overcoming isometric exercise on the Isochain for 6 seconds. When we're performing a contraction, the peak muscular contraction, the peak muscular force comes from the beginning of the concentric phase. Think deadlift, when we're all the way in the bottom and we have to utilize so much power just to get the weight off the ground. But once you get it off the ground, it's not cake, but it's a lot easier. Same thing with the bicep curl. The hardest part of it is from lift off. That's it. From bench press, when you rack it off of the bench and you have your arms fully extended, that's the easy part. Bringing it down, that's the easy part. It's when it gets to your chest and you have to push it back. That's the hardest part. And that hardest part of the contraction only happens for 1/10 of a second. So you're taking that same feeling that you get in 1/10 of a second, and you're stretching it out to 6 seconds. What does that mean? How much more did you just get out of a simple Isochain session? So much more. 1/10 of a second working out in the gym versus 6 seconds. It's so weird because it takes less time to get more results on the Isochain, which is hilarious, figuring that, and myself included, as I've been lifting for 12 years, it's almost like it throws everything that we just learned out the window. And it's like, whoa, okay, why don't we just do that all the time? But isometrics shouldn't replace weightlifting. It should be used in conjunction for maximal results. Reason why? Isometrics in the Isochain will develop phenomenal functional strength. When you're in the gym, you can develop a lot of functional strength, but honestly, isometrics do it better. The pros and cons to concentric and eccentric lifting, it just comes down to 2. The first con to both of those are injuries, okay? When the force of the load is either too heavy or the momentum is too high coming in or out of the movement, that's when an injury occurs. And it's usually to a joint. Sometimes it'll be from the muscle fiber, with it being too fatigued and too great a demand being put on it, causing the tear or sprain, either or. But more than likely, it's the joint that suffers the issue, leading to right there an acute injury. And if it's not treated right, it'll be a chronic injury for quite a while, which is very annoying to all of us, speaking from experience here, unfortunately. The other con to concentric and eccentric phase of lifting are DOMS, which I mentioned earlier, delayed onset muscle soreness. Some of us like that feeling though. I know I love it. It makes me feel like I did something in the gym, but it's not necessary. Feeling that feeling doesn't always mean that you got the most effective gym workout. For many years, I really haven't had that feeling unless I switch up the workout routine to put a different stimulus, a different demand on my body, and then my body's like, whoa, what's going on? And then I get the DOMS again for the first couple days of that week, and then it kind of goes away for the next 6 to 8 until it's time to switch up. You don't always get DOMS, and it's not a requirement for having a good workout. The pros to concentric and eccentric phase of lifting is one, it's universally known. We all know that we need to pick things up and put them down, lift things up and put them down. We all know that, you know, caveman, blah, blah, blah. But the major pro is that we know that it's worked, and it's worked for decades and will continue to work in the future. There are plenty more pros and cons, but for the sake of video length and not to ramble, I'm gonna go into isometric and we're gonna wrap it up. So isometric, the cons are that too much isometric training, if you're not familiar with how to properly program yourself, can lead to CNS fatigue. Very different from DOMs. So CNS fatigue, I have a video on that too if you're not familiar with that. Here is a link. The short and sweet of it is you may put 100% into your isometric contraction or workout for that day and your numbers are just trash. Your nervous system is shot. You put such a high demand on your body, hence why I don't perform an Isochain workout right before or after my weightlifting workouts. My body needs time to recover. As much as mentally I'm ready to go, physically it is not, as the demand is just too great. So CNS fatigue is one of the cons to like isometric training, but it kind of just comes with the territory. So that's why wise programming is essential in adding Isochain workouts to your existing workout routine. The other con to isometric training, and this only applies to the other 3 loading reflexes, not the live resistance one. The live resistance one doesn't have this con, but not knowing the loading reflex. So again, like I said, people in the past, when they were utilizing isometric training, they knew that it worked. They felt that they were getting stronger, but they just didn't know how much to push. There was cortical inhibition involved and there was no loading reflex. A recipe for disaster, because that's like going to the gym and there's no numbers on the dumbbells, so you're just going in blind. That's pretty much what a lot of isometric exercises unfortunately had the downfall of, except the Isochain, because again, now we have that readout display for how much we push or pull. Does that make sense? So now we don't have that. It's a live resistance style loading reflex. The pros to isometric training is that it doesn't take long to hit all those muscle fibers, to really utilize Hebb's rule. Muscle fibers that wire together, fire together, that's Hebb's rule, as it only takes 6 seconds. Now that's for strength. 20 to 45 seconds is for hypertrophy. I've said that in many a video before already. Isochain and isometric exercises and programs don't take long. They don't take long at all. So that is a huge pro. Another pro is that even if you're doing the old school isometric phase lift that don't involve an isochain, it's still quick. You push up against the wall or you hold a dumbbell for yielding for not long and you're done. Like it's quick, fast, and you don't have to rest for 60 to 90 seconds between sets like in the gym. You don't have to do that. It's just run and done. Boom, bicep curl, boom, shoulder press, boom, squat, done. Like you're done in like 10 minutes. My Isochain, except when I'm recording, because I gotta make sure that the camera work is good. When I'm doing my Isochain program, I'm not doing it for, at most, I'm doing it for 15 minutes, at most. And that's when I'm slacking and I'm just kind of like, oh my God, that took everything, you know, and I'm getting in my head too much. 10 minutes for the average Isochain program. For my clients, it takes them about 10 minutes. I have a client right now, my first client that is Isochain only. It takes us 25 minutes to go through a 6x6. And it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 exercises. No, 8 exercises. So 4 upper body and 4 lower body. And it only takes us 25 minutes and he's dying at the end of it too. I mean, it works. So it doesn't take long to do. Should this replace weightlifting? No, isometrics are to be used in tandem with that. So isometric, concentric, and eccentric phases of the lift. Hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully now we all know the difference and now we're on the same page on the squad. Thanks for watching. If you liked the video, be sure to drop a like, comment, and if you're not yet part of the No Limit Squad, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Come join the squad with us. We'll see you in the next one. Peace.